Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romans podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it.
Hi guys, Kasia here. As Alex is unable to join us for this episode, I thought I'd try this one on my own. I had fun recording the previous episode about solo travel, so I thought I'll give this one a go. So in today's episode, I'll take you on a journey to one of my favorite places in Italy. Now, I know I say this a lot, but to be fair, I live in Italy and I'm surrounded by many incredible places and stunning landscapes. Plus, I'm a history major, so living in Italy is like a dream come true. It's hard to pick just one favorite place. Today, we're talking about Florence. It stole my heart from the moment I arrived. While I love Rome, Florence is just different Italian experience for me. Rome is the heart and spirit of the Roman Empire, while Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance and a home to the powerful Medici family. It's a place that draws you in with art, culture, and history. I once wrote about Florence that Florence is like a matronly grand aunt who can tell you the stories of the past and show you the treasure she has stored in her attic. She's majestic, well-connected to power, and incredibly wealthy. I think this description for me still holds true. Today, Florence is one of the most popular destinations in Italy, and it's easy to see why. It has all the attractions that appeal to tourists, including museums, churches, stunning architecture, history, and food. Before I came here, I knew I would like it, but I never really anticipated loving it. One thing you may or may not know about me is that I have a degree in history. So when I was in school, I was very fortunate to have a Renaissance expert as my teacher. His name was Professor Bartlett, and the man wasn't just smart. He knew how to tell a story and how to make it come alive. His classes were some of my favorites and really inspired me to visit Italy. He was the kind of person who I think was made for the job that he was doing. So whenever people tell me that history is boring, I always say that you think it's boring because you never had a good history teacher. I was fortunate to have a few, including Professor Bartlett, who in many ways fueled my curiosity and inspired my love for Italy. If it wasn't for them, I might not even be here telling you about Florence or even Italy, but here we are. Let's dive a bit into the history of Florence, as I think it's an interesting one. I promise not to turn this into a history lesson. I just want to give you a better understanding of what makes Florence so special and to give you some context on its history and why it's so important. So Florence was founded by the Romans in 59 BC, as were many other places in Italy, and its location on the Arno River made it appealing as a location and also helped it grow as a trade center. The fall of the Western Roman Empire eventually led to Florence evolving into a powerful city-state during the Middle Ages. But before we get to that part, it's important to mention that somewhere in there in between, we had the Black Death. So the Black Death was a devastating bubonic plague that swept across Europe in the mid-14th century. I think they estimate that it killed between 30 to 50% of Europe's population. That's a lot of people. There was a major social change, and the plague's devastation really led to a sense of renewal and a sense of desire to live life to the fullest. I think many of us can relate to this concept after the last few years we've experienced. This also led to a more open-minded and artistic spirit and embracing arts as sort of an expression of oneself. We also saw a shift power in dynamics as the death of significant portion of the population obviously created a shortage of labor. This then gave rise to higher wages for those that were still around and led to a more prosperous middle class with leisure time for cultural pursuits. So in a nutshell, the Black Death undeniably played a role in the historical context that led to the Renaissance, but it wasn't the sole source of what became the Renaissance movement, which came a few decades after the plague was over. For me, the most interesting part of Florence's history is the rise of Florence and the Renaissance. So we're looking between 14th and 16th centuries. These are the years that I learned the most during my time with Professor Bartlett, and I think those really stick with me. It's commonly acknowledged that Florence is the birthplace of the Renaissance, but what exactly is it? So Renaissance was a cultural and intellectual movement that emphasized classical learning, humanism, and artistic expression. The seeds of the Renaissance were already starting to sprout way before the Medici came to power. However, it's not denying that the Medici family was powerful and that their influence was really undeniable. So these guys had money, like I'm talking Scrooge McDuck money. Like they were really rich. And their vast wealth allowed them to become patrons of the arts. You know, they were the ones who could afford to decorate, build churches, and support all these projects, really, that were very costly. So they were supporting the artists you might know, like Michelangelo, Leonardo, Botticelli. They were all flourishing around Florence as all this money was being put towards education and towards arts and this artistic expression. And those really became the hallmarks of the Renaissance. So who were the Medici and how exactly did they get so rich? The Medici family's rise to power wasn't really a sudden event, much like the development of Florence. It was more like a gradual climb, which was fueled by their success in banking. They were all very smart and they understood political influence. So they started as wool merchants. Somewhere in the 13th century, they were wool merchants, so they were not even into banking. But they slowly transitioned in the 14th century, where Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, he recognized the potential of banking, so he established a bank, the Medici Bank, which grew to become the largest bank in Europe. Like, talk about a success story here, right? So their innovation in financial services, like currency exchange and loans, which was really nothing that was available to the public at that time, helped the Medici secure their position as a powerful banking family. So the Medici family understood the power of influence. This is what makes them so fascinating. They strategically used their wealth to gain political favor. So Cosimo de' Medici, he was the one that's also referred to as Cosimo the Elder, was the one that really solidified their hold on political maneuvering and financial backing. They were not exactly the most welcomed at the beginning, but, thanks to Cosimo, who became an unofficial leader of Florence, this changed, right? So by becoming a leader of Florence and gaining that influence, this ushered in the period of the Medici family and their dominance in the Florentine politics. The Medici family knew how to play the power game. It's really interesting when you look back at the different things that happened and how it helped them create this really huge legacy. They married their daughters into influential European families. They forged alliances with powerful royal houses in France, England. They were even creating strong ties with the papacy, and they even had several members of the family become popes. There is a lot of influence in that family. So it enabled them to become the patrons of arts and science. And, they were very generous with their support. All these scholars, philosophers, and artists, they all came to Florence because this was where, it was the place to be if you were in that sphere. Eventually, the Medici became known as the bankers of Europe. And I always thought this was such a fascinating concept. They established branches across major European cities like London, Rome, I think some places in France. And the vast network allowed them to control a very significant portion of the European finances. They provided loans to the kings and queens, even the popes, which gave them a lot of leverage and a lot of influence and power over European politics and ensured that they stayed in that power. So again, I think the family behind Florence is really fascinating. Eventually, as with everything else, what goes up must come down. The Medici Bank's power declined in the late 16th century, but that didn't really stop their legacy as a powerful family who influenced kings and politics. And I think that helped them leave the mark on European history. So when we talk about Florence and Italian identity, the Tuscan dialect used in Florence became the foundation of modern Italian, the standard Italian that's commonly used across Italy. I don't think it's something that a lot of people know about. And even before Italy became a unified nation, Florence's cultural achievements did contribute to a sense of shared identity among Italians. I think it's something that they all pride themselves on. And in 1865, this is a fun fact, Florence briefly served as the capital of unified Italy before, of course, it changed to Rome. So again, what makes Florence so significant? I think the role Florence played in the rise of the Renaissance was really groundbreaking. It revolutionized art, architecture, literature, and philosophy, and it really left a lasting impact on European culture. Not just Italian peninsula and the surrounding countries, but like all of Europe. And you see the influence of the Renaissance also spreading to other parts of the world, which again really speaks to the power and influence that Florence held. I hope you see how important Florence was and can get a better appreciation for it when you visit. It's a gorgeous city and it was built with all that Medici money, so you bet it's going to be nice. So if you love art and architecture, Florence really is the place to be. Even if you don't care that much about the past, I think you'll love it for the beautiful city that it is. I can't really describe the feeling you get when you're in Florence. It's just that you know that you're surrounded by beauty and art and money. Like, you don't necessarily get that in all the cities, but I think you do get that in Florence. You do get that, that importance. I think it comes across and it's really worth exploring. Now, let's talk about visiting Florence and why it's a must-visit destination for travelers. If you decide to go to Florence as a day trip from Rome or Venice or whatever, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I would really recommend minimum of 2 full days. So I'm not talking like get there on Friday, leave on Saturday evening. You need at least 2 full days in Florence, and I would say up to 5 days to fully immerse yourself in the city. Whenever I go to Florence, I really love staying in Florence, not like somewhere else and going to Florence. I think it's a place that hits you differently at different times of the day. It's different in the evening, it's different in the morning, it's different during the day. The last time we were in Florence, it actually started to rain and it was quite magical because it was so different and it was not what you see constantly with the beautiful flowery pictures. It was just beautiful because it was in the rain, it was magical, and I loved every part of it. And you can't experience that in the few hours that you're there or if you're running from one museum to the other and nobody's stopping to enjoy and embrace the place you're in. Now, I'm not going to get into everything to see and do here as it will be a very long episode, but I'll give you some of the must-see places in Florence, and I encourage you to check out the blog for some additional information that I'll share, and really think of exploring Florence as a multi-day destination. So, of course, the Duomo, which is the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore in Italian, is the most iconic symbol of Florence. And its construction actually started in 1296 and spanned almost 2 centuries. If you ever see that show, The Medici, there is a part where the actual cathedral is built, but the dome isn't. And they're trying to figure out how to put the dome and how to, close it up so it doesn't collapse. And of course, the famous dome, now that we know, is eventually designed by Filippo Brunelleschi. And he was an architect that came up with this idea to build this dome after he saw the one in the Pantheon in Rome. And of course, the rest is history. The Duomo is the largest church in Florence, and it's very iconic. I personally am not a huge fan of the outside of it. Like the whole pink and green is sort of, I don't know, it's not my favorite to say. I love the architecture of it and I love the actual building, but I wouldn't say the colors are necessarily my favorite. I'm not sure if that's going to make people mad at me or not, but honestly, it's still a beautiful place. It's just not necessarily my favorite color combination. And if you are in the actual church, you can go to the very top of the Duomo and there is a panoramic area where you can see all the views of Florence, which is really quite nice if you want to see that. I do recommend it. Now, another very iconic symbol of Florence is the Ponte Vecchio, which is the famous bridge that goes over the river Arno. And it was actually the only bridge in Florence that wasn't destroyed during World War II. So you can actually really feel the history as you're walking through it. Today, it's lined with centuries-old goldsmith shops. It's a tradition that started, I think, in the 16th century. So again, you can walk through it and kind of feel what it looked like, a few centuries ago. and kind of get that really historic experience. Even if you're not into buying, you can just even browse the windows and displays, and it's actually quite fun to do. Again, it gets a bit crowded during tourist season, but depending on when you go, your experience might be different. Now, we couldn't talk about Florence without a stop at one of the Medici homes. I want to say home, but really it's like a massive palazzo. So Palazzo Vecchio is the imposing fortress-like palace that served as the seat of power for the Florentine government for a few centuries. And inside, you'll find frescoes and sculptures, including works by Donatello and Michelangelo, whereas Palazzo Pitti is the more opulent private residence of the Medici family, and it has really outstanding apartments, and you can admire a collection of Renaissance paintings here. And I would say don't miss a stop at the Bubbly Gardens, which is really one of my favorite spots in Florence, and I recommend you not skip them. So quite often you can escape the crowds because I don't think as many people go to the Bubbly Gardens, and those were the Medici's family private gardens. And it's quite massive garden, and you have sculptures, fountains, manicured hedges. It's quite beautiful. You might not expect to see something like this in Florence, but it's really nice. And when you think that it was someone's private garden, it's even more spectacular. Another place you'd want to stop by is the Accademia Gallery. And here's where you'll find Michelangelo's David. So, of course, the iconic masterpiece of Renaissance is the star attraction here. But, there's a lot more to see than just the David. The gallery also has other Renaissance works. Again, you'll find Donatello, Botticelli, all the great names. And I really recommend spending a few hours in here to immerse yourself in these marvelous works of art that, are just priceless. The Uffizi Gallery is really one of my favorite museums. And I'm not just talking about Florence. I think it's really the ones I've been to all over the world. It's one of my favorites. Think Renaissance masterpiece jackpot. That's the best way, I think, to describe it. Because you'll have an extensive collection of Renaissance art. You'll have masterpieces by Botticelli, including The Birth of Venus, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Titian, and there's just so many more. So really, when you're there, you're walking through history. And it's really interesting to see the artistic development of the Renaissance. So again, I would recommend a few hours here just so you can sit and look at the stuff around you because it's really spectacular. Piazza della Signora is another great place to check out. Now, it's a piazza, so it's not a museum. You don't have to pay to get in. There's a copy of Michelangelo's David. And, of course, the equestrian statue of Cosimo de' Medici. So, you can't miss it. You don't have to go inside a museum to see art because art is everywhere, even on the streets. And that's what makes, really, Florence such a fantastic place to explore. Now, let's talk about a few other places which I think are worth stopping at. Another church worth checking out is the Santa Croce Church. The Duomo gets most of the attention for everyone that visits Florence, but Santa Croce is really somewhere you should stop by. It's nicknamed the Pantheon of Florence because it's the final resting place for many of the greats that we've mentioned, Michelangelo, Galileo, Machiavelli. Those people are buried here, and you can just walk in the footsteps of the greats that used to live here. And the church itself is of a Gothic architecture, but it's got really incredible frescoes inside. Another great place to explore is the Oltrarno district across the Arno River. Sorry, I can never pronounce too many vowels together. Again, it's a great district that's very laid back and has a thriving artisan scene. So here you'll find some charming streets. There's some little workshops and craftsmen, and you can buy anything from leather goods to jewelry to Florentine paper. And it's nice to buy something that's very unique to the area and made there. Now, let's talk about food and the culinary delights that await you here. Florence is, of course, a feast for the eyes, but it's also a feast for the stomach. As Alex is not here to talk about food, I'll do my best to highlight Florentine culinary delights. As many of them are meat dishes, I can honestly tell you that I have not tried them, and I actually had to look up what they were. But if you're a meat eater, here are your options for food. So first one is the iconic bistecca florentina, which is a Florentine steak. And this iconic dish is a must try, apparently, for meat lovers. It's a thick cut, about 5 centimeters, so it's about 2.5 inches, T-bone steak, traditionally grilled over charcoal or wood. The emphasis is on quality of the meat, cooked to perfect medium rare to retain its juicy tenderness. If that speaks to you, you should have it. Lampredotto is another dish for adventurous eaters. It's a unique Florentine street food. It's made from the stomach of the cow. So there you go. It's slow cooked with vegetables, that tomato broth, and it's very tender. It's served with a bread roll with a spicy or green sauce, and it's apparently hearty and full of flavor. Now, another dish that I think is worth trying is the ribollita. It's a rustic stew that's also a quintessential Tuscan food. It's especially good during the colder months, as it's got a lot of good vegetables. So it's got cannellini beans, black cabbage, leftover bread, and it's simmered in a rich tomato broth. So it's, again, very hearty and very satisfying, and especially good for colder days. Of course, we couldn't stop without gelato. Florence, of course, has many great gelaterias when you can get your gelato on. It's one of my favorite things to do, like no matter where I am in Italy, and the ones in Florence are pretty tasty. And, don't be afraid to experiment with different flavors, and Florence has lots. So pistachio, ricotta, or even rose. I've tried rose before. I think I liked it. I can't remember. And of course, since we are in Tuscany, make sure you pair your meal with local Tuscan wine, as the region is known for Chianti, which is a red wine with fruity and earthy character. And you can also explore other regional varieties. There's the Vernaccia di San Gimignano. It's a white wine known for its crisp acidity. So if you want to try something different, I recommend a stop at the Mercato Centrale. It's a bustling indoor market, and it really has everything that you want to eat there. There are stalls with fresh produce, local cheese, cured meats, and of course, Tuscan specialties. And you can also taste different food, or you can grab ingredients for lunch if you want to make your own meal. That's always a great place to explore. And of course, I always recommend taking a cooking class or a tour, and you can really get to know the flavors of the place you're staying by partaking in a class like this. Now, if you're staying in Florence for a few days, you can take a pasta making class one day and then go for a wine tour on another day, and still don't be in a rush. You can just come back and enjoy your time there while you also have someone else take the winery and brings you back, so you don't have to worry about drinking and driving. Let's talk about how to get to and around Florence. Despite being quite a large city, Florence has an airport, but it's a fairly small one, and it might not have as many flight options, especially if you're coming from North America. If you're flying directly to Florence, you'll probably be better off flying to Pisa. It's a larger airport, and it's about 50 kilometers west of Florence. There are more options into Pisa, especially from North America. But I would say if you fly to Italy from North America, you probably want to fly into Rome and just take the train over. There's a lot of quick connections between Florence and other major cities. There are high-speed trains that can take you between Florence and Rome within like an hour or so, which is really convenient. Of course, our favorite way is to drive. We've been to Florence with the car many times. You can always just drive there. But keep in mind that the historic center of Florence is mostly pedestrian area, so you can't really drive your car in everywhere, which also might be challenging. Also be careful because they have these traffic zones where you can get fined if you enter them. Again, these are your options. You can fly in, you can take the train, or you can take the car. And of course, if you're taking an organized tour, they will take you into the city. Now, let's talk about how to get around Florence once you get there. The historic center of Florence is relatively small, and it's really pedestrian friendly. This makes it really easy and convenient for exploring the main attractions, and you can walk around the charming streets, the hidden piazzas, and not have to worry about getting somewhere or getting to from somewhere. Of course, I also would recommend comfortable walking shoes, as you'll likely be doing a lot of walking. Florence also has a pretty good public transportation systems. They have buses. They connect various parts of the city. And it's actually quite convenient to use the bus. We've used it. You can bring your dog on the bus, and you can buy the ticket at a newsstand or a tobacco shop. There's also trams. which is also quite convenient for getting around the city, particularly if you're traveling between city center and the airport. The tickets can be purchased on board or at vending machines at the tram stops. Now, if you really want to take a taxi, they do have some, especially if you're coming from the airport or train station. So you can take a cab. Again, taxis can get expensive during peak hours, so just keep that in mind if you're coming here at a late time or during a high peak season. Florence also offers a bike sharing program, which really is convenient for exploring the city at a leisurely pace, and you can rent bikes from various locations around the city. Again, I'm going to say walking tours is a fantastic way to combine sightseeing and learning about Florence. If you want a quick overview and you want somebody to show you around, take a walking tour. Many of them are offered in different languages, and some even focus on specific themes. So you can take like a Renaissance theme one or a Florentine cuisine one, and there are so many of them to choose from that you'll definitely find something that you like. Now, I would also say consider purchasing a Firenze card. It's like a tourist pass, and it offers you free entry to many museums and the attractions, and also offers you access to unlimited public transportation. I always like using those in the cities. I'm there for like 3-4 days, which is also convenient. Now, if you plan on venturing outside the city center or even exploring other towns like Siena or Pisa, there is transportation between them, but I would either recommend taking a tour that takes you directly there, or if you already have a car, just going there for a day trip and then coming back to Florence when you're done. It's a lot easier to do than, going from one place to another. But ultimately, it depends on what you're planning to do in the city. Now, when it comes to accommodations, I would say consider how much walking you're comfortable with. Staying close to the main attractions obviously means you have to walk less. If you stay further, it means you might require more reliance on public transportation or taxis. However, hotels outside of the main areas might be a bit more affordable. So again, it all depends on your budget and when you're coming. I would say research specific hotels and read reviews to get a sense of what they offer. I'll leave also some additional information of the different areas of Florence you might want to look at, especially coming for the first time, to help you plan. Now, also, don't forget to look for deals and discounts on hotel booking websites. Now, let's talk about when to visit. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think you can visit Italy all year round. And I would even say times between January to March or November are probably even better. And it really depends on your availability and what you want to see. If you're not able to travel to Italy during that time, here's what I think you should consider. For pleasant weather and maybe more manageable crowds, April, May, or September, October would be the better option for you. Now, if you want the longer, hot, vibrant days and like the action and you don't mind the crowds, obviously July, August might be good for you. But again, if you come during that time, you're going to have to pay more, right? So everything else is going to cost you more. There'll be more people. Yeah, the weather is nice, but again, it comes with a premium price tag. I think it really depends on what you're looking to get out of the experience and plan accordingly. Another thing I think you should keep in mind when you're visiting Florence is try visiting during the week as opposed to the weekends, because weekends tend to be busier, right? Especially during peak season. You have a lot of people coming for quick city breaks and more people have time off, so they'll come on the weekend. And this also includes other Italians, which makes it a bit more busy than it does Monday to Friday. If you're on a tight budget, shoulder season offers the best value for flights and accommodations. But make sure to research specific events and festivals happening during your desired time, because that can also impact the prices and your experience in the city. Ultimately, the best time to visit Florence really depends on your personal preference and priorities. So consider the pros and the cons of each season before you make that decision. I hope you enjoy my thoughts about Florence, and I hope this information helps you with planning your trip. If you have any additional questions or want more information, let me know. And I will cover more fantastic cities that connect to the Renaissance and that whole movement in future episodes, as I think they also offer a lot for visitors, especially if you want to learn more about the Renaissance and the Italian culture and its influence on the world. So stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts about Florence, and I hope this information keeps you with planning your trip to Italy. Ciao!
And this brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review on whatever you're listening right now. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.